Resuming debate. Reprise au débat. The honourable member for St. John's East.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je veux remercier aussi mon collègue et ami de Ville-Marie-Île-des-Sœurs pour partager son temps avec moi. Thank you. I'm glad to rise today to continue the debate on our actions that our government is taking to meet the clear objectives of our fair, compassionate immigration and asylum system. These objectives are to save lives, to offer protection to the displaced, the most vulnerable, and the persecuted, to meet our country's international legal obligations with respect to refugees, and to respond to international crises by providing assistance to those in need of protection. Comme vous le savez, au cours des derniers mois, nous avons été témoins d'une augmentation notable des migrations irrégulières à des points clés situés le long de la frontière que nous partageons avec les États-Unis, alors que des personnes souhaitant demander l'asile sont entrées au Canada entre les points d'entrée officiels. Les personnes qui demandent l'asile au Canada doivent être traitées avec compassion et se prévaloir de tous les recours prévus par les lois. Lorsque nous les traitons avec respect, de leur donnant l'occasion de se faire entendre, nous agissons conformément à la longue tradition humanitaire du Canada pour laquelle notre pays est reconnu partout dans le monde. As I noted, Madam Speaker, this is a long-standing tradition, and Canadians are rightfully proud of our strong international reputation for humanitarian leadership, which was damaged by the Harper Conservatives during their 10 years in government. Since the election, through the work of our Ministers of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship and the Department, our government remains focused on efficient and streamlined processing, as well as developing more flexible and nimble responses to adapt to the influx of asylum seekers at the Quebec border and elsewhere. One important response to this situation, Madam Speaker, and mentioned many times by the Minister, is that our government has accelerated the processing of all applications for work permits for asylum seekers across Canada from 3 months to 3 days, so that they are able to support themselves while they are in this country. This was something that both the governments of Canada and Quebec worked on together collaboratively. Jusqu'à maintenant, 97% des demandes de permis pour travail représentées par des migrants irréguliers ont été approuvées et quelques 3% seulement ont été refusées, principalement en raison d'examens médicaux incomplets. Depuis avril 2017, plus de 12 500 permis de travail ont été délivrés à des demandeurs d'asile au Québec. Notre gouvernement est heureux de travailler en étroite collaboration avec le gouvernement du Québec pour gérer l'influx de demandeurs d'asile qui traversent la frontière dans cette province. And given the influx of asylum seekers, Budget 2018, as noted by the Minister, has invested $173.2 million towards managing irregular migration to ensure security at the border and faster processing of asylum claims by the IRB. The Conservatives flip-flop on this because the member for Calgary-Nose Hill called for this increase, and the Conservatives who are now arguing against the additional funding, which is somewhat typical. Madam Speaker, Quebec will also receive $3.2 billion as part of the Canada Social Transfer in 2018-2019, but more importantly, we have provided an increase, as my colleague said, of $112 million to support settlement and integration services in Quebec under the Canada-Quebec Accord, which the Conservatives voted against, even though they are calling on the government through this debate today to provide more funding to Quebec. Typical when the shoe on the other foot is a flip-flop. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, our government, Madam Speaker, continues to lead the collaborative work in the ad hoc intergovernmental task force on irregular migration, which is ensuring a coordinated approach across all different levels of government. Rather than the politics of fear and division, which lost the Conservatives the election, we are focused on working with Canadians together to manage the situation at the Canada-US border. Our government is managing the volumes we are seeing now and are preparing for any fluctuations, as any responsible government would do. Before closing, Madam Speaker, let me make some final points. Asylum seekers face a rigorous process to determine whether or not they have a legitimate claim, according to Canadian international law. There are no shortcuts and no guarantees that an asylum seeker will be able to stay in Canada. And the member for Calgary-Nose Hill should know this, having been the critic on this file for over 2 years. The NDP, of course, listening to their testimony today, should also remember that Not everyone is eligible to make an asylum claim, and not all asylum claims should or will be accepted. All eligible claims are assessed by the Independent Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada and are decided on a case-by-case basis. If the IRB determines that individuals are not in need of Canada's protection, they are removed from Canada again, something the member from Calgary-Nose Hill knows and understands, but the NDP would open our borders to 11 million irregular migrants who are illegally in the United States with their proposal of completely undermining and tearing up the Safe Third Country Agreement. Madam Speaker, let's talk about which side has been absent on our immigration and asylum system. The Conservatives had families, spouses and children wait up to 26 months to be reunited. Our government eliminated that backlog and we now process applications within 12 months. The Conservatives made applicants under the federal live-in caregiver system wait over 6.5 years to be processed. We eliminated that backlog, and by the end of 2018, we will have a processing standard of 1 year, 12 months. The Conservatives created the legacy asylum claim backlog, those who had to wait almost a decade to have their claim heard after the Conservatives left them behind. Our government will be eliminating this backlog by the end of this year, Madam Speaker. We are also working hard to eliminate the privately sponsored refugee backlog left by the Conservatives. Madam Speaker, our government is processing study permits, citizenship and economic immigration applications faster than ever before. And as the member of St. John's East, I am confident that the initiatives I have outlined will help us maintain our strong and compassionate immigration system. I trust that these points will help my honourable colleagues support our government's position and our efforts. We are fixing the mess left behind by the Conservatives and the movers of this motion, and the motion itself seeks to make things even worse. So I will not be supporting it. Madam Speaker, I have roughly 3 minutes. Okay, wonderful. I have an opportunity now to talk a little bit about my time and the testimony that I've had the opportunity to hear at the Citizenship and Immigration Committee, on which I'm one of the new members. This is obviously a topic of which we're greatly seized. While I trust that the government response is going to be safe and effective and is going to support the people who are irregularly crossing at the border and have been since last summer, we will be briefed on this further as to the particulars of those efforts. But the motion itself is, it's somewhat bizarre. Taking responsibility for the massive social costs burdening the provincial governments. Well, the government of Canada and the government of Quebec have worked together to design a system now where the irregular migrants in 3 days have a work permit so that they are able to work, earn money, pay taxes, and contribute to the economic development in the province of Quebec, just like all immigrants have the possibility to do. That lowers their burden on the social services system. So in fact, point 3 is completely wrong. We are in fact addressing this problem head-on in collaboration with our partners. I admit the Prime Minister's irresponsibility of something that was in a tweet. But Canada is a welcoming country. We are welcoming immigrants to Canada. We are helping and supporting refugees. We are accepting legitimate asylum seekers who come to the border, and that is what is determined. Those people who cross irregularly at the border with a valid asylum claim are not irregular migrants. I mean, they're not illegal migrants. They are just merely irregular migrants and this is how they're choosing to seek asylum. And we support them. We welcome them. We will meet our international obligations to them. The other point, to ensure that the agencies responsible for our borders are properly equipped so they continue to do their jobs effectively. This is, in fact, what we have done. This is what Budget 2018 does, that the Conservatives voted against in ad nauseum, point by point, line by line, every item. And yet, here we are on this item, where now they are turning around and saying, do more. We are doing what we need. Finally, the request that the government table in the House no later than May 11th a plan to stop the influx of people. Well, Madam Speaker, again, if asylum seekers come to the border, we have an international obligation to them. It's a fundamental human right that all citizens of the world whose countries are members of the United Nations enjoy, that they have the right to leave their country or the country in which they are located. And if they are legitimate asylum seekers, the country in which they enter should accept them and process their asylum claim in accordance with the rule of law. That's what we're doing. Every point of this motion makes no sense, but it's dog whistle politics, Madam Speaker, and I don't want anything further to do with it. I urge all members of this House to defeat this motion today. Thank you.
And comments? The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, Madam Speaker, I'll be the first to announce racism or dog whistle politics when I see it, but some of the rhetoric coming from Liberal members doesn't match reality. The fact is both Liberal and Conservative governments have strongly supported Canada's immigration and refugee system. I just, in preparation for this debate, I downloaded some statistics from Stats Canada about the number of immigrants who've come to Canada every year. And it tells a story. The facts don't lie. The facts are that during the Harper government of some 10 years, a record number of immigrants were admitted in the post-war period. Some 260,000 immigrants a year were admitted during that post-war, that 10-year period. 26,000 UN refugees a year during that period, some 260,000 refugees over that 10-year period, much higher than what was under the Chrétien-Martin years, higher than what was under the Mulroney years. So I think we have to tone down some of the rhetoric on this and focus on the issue at hand, which is the border crossings that are taking place in Laval, Quebec, and Emerson, Manitoba.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the measured tones and the respectful dialogue coming from the member in his question. It is true that Canada is an open country and has been for many years, and that if we look percentage-wise at the size of the population of the country and the amount of immigration that's permitted from time to time, I'm not sure if that would bear out in some of the statistics that were proposed, perhaps in the raw numbers, but if you look at the percentage of the population, I'd like to see whether or not that, in fact, bears out. But when you look at the text of the motion before me, and if you look at what the Citizenship and Immigration Committee is currently studying and being briefed on, of which the sponsor of the motion is a member, you can't but think for a moment that what's being proposed here in the motion and the antics and the rhetoric that's being said to the media, including this morning in her press briefing, is not entirely solely about the issue of whether or not people are crossing irregularly at the border and what needs to be done. Obviously, the government is doing a lot. It's devoted a lot of resources to this. I trust that all the efforts that they're doing through public safety, immigration, will handle this as well or better than the situation with the similar situation that happened with Mexican migrants. But when you look at the text taken as a whole, it goes beyond that. It's attempting to drive a wedge between Canada. It's referring to people who cross irregularly as illegals, or it's to refer to them illegal immigrants or illegal aliens or some such notion of this, deprecating language that insults and intimidates newcomers to this country. And again, I don't want to stand for it. I do appreciate the member himself has not used that term in his discourse, and I do appreciate that he's not taken this tack, but the rest of his party has. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his comments. I want to note a couple of things. First off, his colleague before him raised the issue around suspending the Safe Third Country Agreement as a unilateral move. Just for all of the members' information, in fact, in the Act itself, that both countries, Canada or U.S., can give notice and actually suspend temporarily the Safe Third Country Agreement. So it is not in violation of the Act or anything like that. It is absolutely within our right to do exactly that. And to the member's comment, somehow he seems to think that the NDP is suggesting that we should simply open up the border and allow anybody to come through without the proper assessments. Now, that is simply not true. What we're saying is for people to come through in an orderly fashion, and you can do that by suspending the Safe Third Country Agreement so people are not forced to cross over irregularly. And when you do that, when you cross over with the suspension of the Safe Third Country Agreement, you will still be processed accordingly. In fact, in my speech, my 20-minute speech today, I went through the entire process. So I would like to ask the member to retract his comments.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And of course, I was not convinced by the arguments put forward by the honourable member. When I look in the totality of the logistics and what's possible and what's realistic to expect from people, that if we open the borders to all asylum claims to be processed regularly, we will make a bad situation worse. It's totally inconsistent with the government's position to date or the previous. It's inconsistent with our relationship with the Americans in managing our shared border, the regular crossings, and it's unrealistic when you expect that Canada, a country of 35 million people, could expose itself potentially to regular crossings at the border in Windsor or at the airport in Toronto of up to, even if it's only 1% of the number of illegals in the United States,